So, for people tuning in, welcome to another Pepper Soup Talk, the last Pepper Soup Talk of 2020. We're excited for this one. One, because we got someone with us today who's been a real ambassador and just been really part of this One to Love movement from the beginning. He's come to a lot of the events. He's taken part in some of the skits and marketing that we've done. And we haven't had a chance to really sit down and talk about, his background and what he does, which is very important to the topic that we're discussing today. And so, today we're going to be talking about Black men and mental health.
Absolutely.
And so we got a licensed therapist with us.
Not licensed yet.
Not licensed yet. Pre-licensed. Okay, so on the way. We know he has a wealth of knowledge. Like, I know a lot of the time, when I see him on IG or social media, he's got all the books regarding Black men and mental health and just a lot of the topics surrounding it. And so, we're happy to invite to the show today Odilakachi Onwukwe to Pepper Soup Talk. And Toby, who's supposed to be interviewing me today, he's coming from the county. He's running a little bit late, but we're just gonna go ahead and get started with this. Toby can jump in when he comes. But thank you for coming, Odie.
No problem. It's a pleasure, actually.
For sure.
Definitely.
So, I said a little bit about you and your involvement in One to Love too. Maybe you could just talk a little bit, about give an intro by yourself, and we can start with that.
All right. Full name Odilakachi W.H Onwukwe. Right. Born in Chicago, Illinois. Yeah. Whenever I, say it to people, oh my God, it's not your real name. And I gotta pull out my ID. It's always a hilarious thing. But born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, West Side. Went to school in the South. Got my bachelor's from Alabama State University. Graduated magna cum laude in rehabilitation services with a concentration in addictions. A minor in psychology. Then went to FAMU, Florida Agricultural Mechanical University in Tallahassee, Florida. Got my master's in community psychology with a focus in Afrocentric theory. I have been living in Philly for the past 2 years. Since I've been in Philly, I have had a multitude of different positions in the mental health field. I started off as a per diem adult outpatient therapist. Then I became a full-time adult outpatient therapist. And after that, I became an administrator. I was a associate program director for a rehabilitation treatment facility. And now I am a primary therapist for a rehabilitation treatment facility for adults. So a little bit of background on me.
So wealth of experience in the mental health industry. So this is the first time we're using YouTube.
Right.
We're trying to go with YouTube Live for today. Looks like we got the connection back. But bear with us for any technical difficulties we may be having. We're also streaming this on Odie's IG Live.
Yeah.
What's your IG name?
It's at my name super long.
At my name super long. So you can also catch the stream here too. So we're just gonna go ahead and get started. So mental health.
Yeah.
Mental health. And so I know you're a therapist and you've listed a number of the places that you've worked.
Right.
What was your entry point into this space? Because especially like when you think about our communities, the Black community, African community, mental health oftentimes is something that isn't spoken about, and so like what sparked that interest in it for you, and then what was your entry point into the space?
I think what sparked my interest initially was my own personal experience. So, as a shorty, my mother told me that I was in a perpetual state of anger. Right? I was consistently angry. I was angry all of the time, and because I did not have healthy outlets to express that emotion, I was, like I said, I was in a consistent state of anger. So there would be times when my mother would sit and we would talk, and she would literally just ask me, "What's going on?" Right? Giving me that chance and that space to really express what it is that I was feeling without being biased. So I know that there are a lot of people who will say that black men are coddled by their mothers, which a lot of us are, right? But my mother was very balanced in the way that she would speak to me. She would speak to my cousin in such a way where I would feel as if though I wasn't being told what I wanted to hear, or I wasn't being pacified. My concerns were actually being validated, right? Well, most of the time, because nobody's perfect.
And how old were you around this time? What?
It was between, I would say, between the ages of like 12 and 17.
Okay.
Right? So it was a relatively decent period of time through my adolescence where my mother was a staple in me understanding what it actually means to engage with somebody in such a way where you can simultaneously validate this person, but also, assist them in continuing to progress the way that they want to progress. Does that make sense? After that point, when I was going to school, I wasn't originally going to school to be a therapist. I was originally going to school to be a physical therapist, or a different type of therapist, right? Until I saw all the math classes that I had to take. I was like, I ain't doing that, G. No, I'm not doing it, right? But the first time in my life I ever made straight A's was in college. And it was when I took on that psychology minor. Yeah. I made straight A's first time in my life. I was like, okay, well, this is clearly my strength. This is something that I should continue to lean into. Yeah. And it was funny because right before I left undergrad, my friend was like, well, I can see you being a therapist. So I was like, fucking crazy. No, I can't. So then I came back a couple of years later. She was like, look what I said. Yeah. You a therapist. You remember when I told you that? I was like, right. So as far as entry points go, I mean, ultimately it was just me being fascinated by the idea that human behavior can be modified simply through conversation and suggestion.
I see. Yeah. And it sounds like growing up too, because it sounds like your mom really gave you a space to. Would you say she gave you a space to express yourself? Yes. You talk about how she validated your feelings. Yes. And if we're gonna be honest, that isn't always the case when it goes to African households, especially. So being able to kind of, I guess, give you that space at that age, it's dope to see. And something else to mention too is you talk about your friend, how he kind of saw that in you, and oftentimes as people around us, they can see what we might be fit for, right? And that's cool too that he said that, right? So it was really, for you, would you say it was really the psychology classes you took that drew you into that space? You talked about, originally you were looking to become a physical therapist, right? And then you shifted gears into, psychology specifically. So what was the entry point into, I want to become a therapist specifically, and I want to study this particular part of, I guess you could say it's a part of psychology as well. We study this further.
There are a myriad of factors that coalesced into that realization. The first one was I was in undergrad and I had a professor, his name is Dr. Ernest Blackshear. He's a clinical psychologist, right? So I was talking to him about the difference between psychology and psychiatry, and although both of those things are they're valid options as it relates to seeking mental health treatment out. He said that he preferred to be a psychologist because psychiatrists generally don't have the time to talk to their patients. 9 times out of 10, it's you are giving me a list of symptoms and I'm giving you something in return that is supposed to assist you with these symptoms, right? For me, that wasn't palatable. Not only that, I wasn't going to med school, not doing that, right? So clinical psychology in and of itself became an interest of mine for about, I want to say like a year and a half. But then I began to realize that clinical psychology focused too much on pathology. It focused too much on what created this reality instead of assisting in the process of removing this malady from this person, right? So then I began to get more into different types of psychology. How you doing, brother?
Yo, what's good, man?
Good. So,
nice to you to join us. So not to cut you off, we got Toby here, who's gonna be interviewing with us, and Toby, how you feeling?
Pretty good, man. Just One. I don't know how to explain today yet, but I think it's me.
Listen, man, some days I was like that.
Yeah.
Like that.
But as far as you know, psychology, therapy, and all those things, I really began to solidify myself in the space of therapy when I graduated from grad school and I actually became a therapist. My caseload was primarily young black men between the ages of, I think, at that point, my youngest client was 3 and my oldest was 65. So I literally had the entire gamut.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 to 65. My youngest client, and I remember to this day, our first treatment plan was for me to help him learn how to tie his shoes, how to button his shirt. But what was inclusive of that was assisting him in regulating his emotions, because whenever he was a very go-getter type of young boy. Like, even at the age of 3, he was extremely determined to get things done, and he was very proud of what it is that he had done. So what I recognized in him was that he would get frustrated doing tasks that he couldn't complete. So it wasn't that he didn't know how to tie his shoes or button his shirt. It's that he became so frustrated that he stopped. Right? So that's on one side of the spectrum. And the other side of the spectrum with my 65-year-old was essentially him just feeling as if though he could not freely access his emotions because of everything else that was going on around him. Right? So a lot of our sessions fixated on just talking and just being able to, you know, be in a space where he could just talk. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when I was in that space, I was in Tallahassee at the time, and I was at that agency for about a year and 8 months. Within that year and 8 months, because of the diversity of my clientele and because of the age range that they were, or the age ranges that they were, I got a significant amount of experience in a very short period of time. And at that point, I knew, okay, this is something that I want to do. This is something that I want to do long term in different areas, in different ways.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a wide range, you know, to get that kind of experience too. And something that stands out to me, you know, I heard emotional regulation. I heard, you know, what's going on around, you know, things that are going on around you. So would you say that there are common denominators for, you know, when a person is dealing with, you know, challenges with their mental health? So, for instance, like emotional regulation, or you know, not being able to, let's say, like understand or like label your emotions. Or, like, would you say like there's like trends that you tend to see when a person's like dealing with mental health issues, be that anxiety, be that, you know, whatever the, you know, case may be. And I know that, like, even when we talk about mental health, I mean, we can be talking about anxiety, depression, which comes up a lot, but we can also be talking about, you know, certain mental illnesses like bipolar disorders. So it's a broad spectrum, or broad range. But, you know, a big issue that we see, especially that we're seeing now with the pandemic, is anxiety, high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression, and you know, suicide rates have been going up. So I guess starting or sticking with that right now, if you want to touch on that.
When we talk about trends or commonalities in mental health, right, we have to remove ourselves from this idea that everybody's mental health presents in the same way, because it doesn't, right? So to ask the question whether or not there are commonalities removes from the intricacies that come with mental health and, you know, somebody recognizing that their mental health or what their mental state is not only valid, but it's something that can be helped, right? So let's say, for example, anxiety or depression. Those things can be moderated not only by gender, but by race, right? So for example, the persons with the highest suicide attempts are women, but the people with the highest rate of suicide completion are men, right? When women attempt suicide or when women complete suicide, 9 times out of 10, the way that they choose to complete suicide is less violent. It's usually by, hanging or pills or something of that nature, whereas with men, it's a little bit more violent. They tend to choose to do reckless driving into things or shoot themselves, right? So even just those variations, even just within the action itself, is moderated by that person's perception of what is or what is maintained, right? So let's say, for another example, when it comes to depression, both women and men, right? Because men have been socially modified to power through things or like try to not engage in their emotions, their depression presents differently. Their depression usually will present as anger. It'll usually present as explosions. It'll usually present as irritability, right? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You might cry on the inside, you might shed a couple tears, but the fact that you're even shedding tears makes you more angry, right? Whereas with women, that's when you get the classic perception of depression, whereas, oh, I'm sad, oh, I'm not feeling too good, this, that, and the third. It presents differently, right? So when we're talking about trends, or when we're talking about being able to identify these things, it's a sincerely personal thing. Like, yes, there are some commonalities, or yes, there are some similarities, but ultimately, you do not know that somebody is depressed unless they tell you, or sometimes the person doesn't even recognize what it is that they're experiencing as depression. So let's say, for example, it's a lot of people out here who are extremely irritable, smoke weed all the time, drink all the time, and are constantly fucking. Yeah. Hypersexualization, escapism, and irritability. Those are three functions of depression, or those are three diagnosable symptoms of depression in the DSM-5, if I'm not mistaken. Right? But because that's the way that our culture, those are some things that our culture glorifies, you wouldn't recognize it as a negative symptom. Or you wouldn't recognize it as a symptom at all. You're just thinking, well, I'm just living. Right. Not recognizing that what it is that you are living in is causing you that type of distress. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And so you would also say that, you would have to speak to an individual who's partaking in all those things and talk to him about his circumstance and his life to know if that is in fact depression. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I want to say was, I think as human beings, oftentimes we try to categorize things, and so even when you break it down to, say, men versus women, it makes it easier to maybe to understand, makes it easier to discuss. But like when you think about it, it sounds like something that a lot of times is really person to person, and you have to understand that person's experience and to draw the conclusions and come to the outcome.
Yeah, so just based on what we're discussing, I think one thing we shouldn't overlook is how Black men access their emotion. Overall, we know it's an issue how Black men in general express emotion, how they internalize things, and how that brings itself in not how the emotion is expressed or the lack of expression of those emotions. So in the Black culture, Black men in general, they don't process emotions as efficiently as Black women and stuff like that. Just in terms of trends, what's the kind of factors in our culture that enables this kind of emotional distress or lack of expression within Black men? I know it's personalized based on the individual, but as a culture, we know men do have, especially specifically Black men, do have an issue with this.
So going into because we had to talk about our brothers, right, Black men. So going into this topic of Black men, Toby to segue us into what's up with our what's up?
I like when you ask that. Like, what's up with it? She like, what's going on? To answer it succinctly, a lot, right? So, I have a question for both of you all before we begin this. What is Black? What is a man?
Man, that's a loaded question. So to me, what is black? You know, when I think about black and the idea of being black, first what comes to mind is that being black isn't a monolith. And so for me, it's the color of my skin, and then it's the culture that I'm a part of, and the way in which I partake and express that culture in my life. So it's very specific to me, like what being black is specific to like to me, right? And then what being a man is. I'm gonna be honest. I think a lot of it is. I mean, you can look at it from again, like the biological standpoint of your the parts that you're born with, and then how you're socialized by gender, right? And I think that at least that's how I see it. I see it as being the way in which I've been socialized and growing up, you're taught certain things around like, this is what men do or this is what men don't do, and then you ultimately either keep what you were either taught or what was pushed on you by society or by images, and maybe a lot of those teachings, a lot of that information you took in, you keep some of it. Maybe some of it continues to be subconscious because you've been conditioned in a certain way, and then in other ways you start questioning. Let's say around what you've been socialized to think and believe, and then realize a lot of it is based on our society, it's based on our culture. I don't know if that answers.
No, it does.
Saying, but,
it does.
That's kind of how I see things.
Yeah. It does.
I guess for me, it's more black and white. I understand the intricacies of defining what it is. But for me, after a certain skin tone, you're black. This is the shade of your skin, and as a man, like I can kind of point out is what you grew up to believe. So for me, a man is, I guess my vision or version of what a man is more like alpha male type. There's more, of course, in the African culture. It's one way, especially most foreigners who grow up in, well, not the best neighborhoods. First generation immigrant, so the people around you, if it's not from the home, it's people from your neighborhood.
Right.
You're definitely going to be one kind of way. So yeah, that's alpha male type-ish. But I don't really exude that kind of mentality, but in some of my mannerisms, for sure, could be an issue with it.
Okay. So, all of the answers that you all provided to what is black and what is a man are valid. Most of your answers had themes of culture. They had themes of socialization. They had themes of hierarchy, because if there's an alpha, then there must be a beta, right? There must be an omega. So themes of hierarchy, right? Themes of omnipresence. And when I say omnipresence, things that are in your environment, right? Things that you said are quote unquote pushed upon us, right? All of these things are valid. But when you recognize all of these moving pieces as it relates to self-definition, you then get into the scope of how difficult it can be to define oneself. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm going to dissect this from a couple of different places, and for the sake of simplicity or for the sake of brevity, I'm going to narrow it down to cis-het black men. Right? So black men who identify with the gender that they were assigned, or they identify with the gender that they were born with, and they are, cis-het straight black men.
Okay, you gotta break that down.
So cis-het. So cis-het, and I said cis-het straight, but I think now that I think about it, that's redundant. So cis is you identifying with the sex that you are at birth.
Got you.
You know what I'm saying?
Got you.
So you're a man. Well, you're a male who identifies as a man, anatomically male, gender man, right? Het is short for heteronormative or heterosexual, right? So cis het implies that not only do you internalize what you were at birth, but you also engage in primarily heterosexual activities, right? Black, self-explanatory. Men also cis-het black men, right? So when we narrow it down to just that community, or we narrow it down to just that population, I really hope I explained that right. When we narrow it down just to that population of that community, we begin to come to a particular type of analysis that we as black men really do not have a lot of positive perceptions of black men. We really don't, right? Whether it be, you know, this hypersexualized male, whether it be this overtly feminine male, and not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I personally still believe that the narrative that is constructed about feminine or feminine black men, that narrative is extremely narrow and it's utilized in order to continue to assert this perception of white dominance, right? We're going to get to that later. Any conceptualization of the black man is not to the benefit of the black man in the long run. It's not, right? Because it narrows that black man to a one-dimensional understanding of himself and his environment, right? It's primarily reactionary. It's primarily scattered. It's primarily disorganized, right? So I have a challenge for you. I want you to name 4 positive black male influences in television in the last 5 years.
Chadwick Boseman.
Okay.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I can't name another 4.
Nipsey Hussle.
Was he really that popular? Or did people just catch on to him when he died?
I would say if he had lived a little longer, he where he landed at death is where he landed after his death, as far as like the way he was celebrated and given his flowers, the world would have seen. But that's also coming from someone who, you know, has been a big Nipsey Hussle supporter for many years.
So we got Chadwick, we got Nipsey. This is from 2015, yo.
You said since 2015?
Since 2015.
I'm not sure Denzel's not really in the...
Nope.
Not Denzel?
Denzel been around for 2 generations. Nope.
Somebody got out here.
Oh, man.
See how hard that is?
Yeah. I mean,
Could Michael B. Jordan go?
Thinking about the actors, you know.
You dig what I'm saying?
I'm just going to the cast of Black Panther.
Man, this is like Black Panther was the movie experience of the decade. We gonna name all motherfuckers. Forrest Whitaker got there. But even still, how difficult it is to name 5 black men in the last 5 years. And the reason why I put the last 5 years on it is because the way that technology operates now, things go obsolete much faster, way faster, right? 2015 seems like I graduated from undergrad in 2015.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. The cultural landscape was vastly different, right? So when I say black men have very few positive black role models to look towards, and that's just in popular culture. I'm not even talking about in the community itself. I'm not talking about in the environment in which you live on a daily basis. I am talking about just in popular culture, right? That identification of the breadth of my diversity is tantamount in identity development, right? Most children know what race they are and who they are, what all of that. Most children identify with those demographics between the ages of 2 and 3, right? They know who they are, right? When we understand it from that perspective, and once again, that's the reason why I said within the last 5 years, because a young black man at the age of 5 now, in 15 years, based upon the positive black imagery that we have now, where would he be? Is the imagery diverse enough for him to say, I don't have to be a basketball player, I don't gotta be a rapper, I don't gotta be a drug dealer, I can be a myriad of other things. Because you realize rapper, drug dealer, and ball player has been the tune of black men for the past almost 40 years. For the past 40 years, and that's not a coincidence. You dig what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why, you want to see someone like when Barack Obama went in office, people have their
and neither one of y'all named Barack Obama, which is funny.
well, we said
2015.
2015. Obama was out of office 2016. Oh, you're right. I mean, Obama was definitely. What I was gonna say about Obama is that regardless of whatever he passed or whatever he's gonna get done in office, just the imagery of seeing a black man in that position, and someone who black man also had swag. It was something that was very aspirational.
This man put on a tan suit in the world went crazy. Tan suit. Where would not next?
Yeah. So, but I think that's it sounds like that's kind of where you're getting at as far as the imagery and what's put on us, in the media.
Actually, I feel like Barack Obama really hasn't been like in the past couple of years till the election came around.
Yeah. Oh, that's because man dipped off. He was like, I'm done with y'all.
Yeah.
Next time we seen Obama, man was jet skiing on the back of the boat, like I'm living my best life. Come on. But that's, going back to the point of positive imagery, black men, we really are constantly, black people overall, but black men specifically, consistently measure ourselves against a Eurocentric male barometer. What I mean by that is, entirely too often, black men attempt to align themselves, whether it be consciously or unconsciously, with white men because they recognize that white men have power, right? That's one. Two, for most men, we base our self-concept on 3 things: wealth, power, and sexual prowess, right? Wealth, of course, in the sense of money, right? Power in the sense of whether or not we're able to influence and or control people. And sexual prowess, once again, is self-explanatory. How many women we can fuck in a particular period of time, right? None of those things have anything to do explicitly with creation. Do you understand what I'm saying? None of those things have anything specifically to do with identification of self. It more so has to do with collecting resources and engaging in procreation. That is archaic, but it's also relevant because it's primal. It literally constitutes to the way that we provide. White men have more social salience and more access to these things that bring these materials to them in order to create. They also have much larger license and much larger leeway to destroy. The reason being is because they have, in effect, utilized this land for their own making and for their own moving. Ergo, they have created the reality that fits them the best at the subjugation of others. Right? Now, why is that important? It's important because black men have the exact opposite. We have the least amount of range, we have the least amount of capabilities and or access to resources of both creation and destruction. And our sexual prowess is fetishized to a point where we tend to allocate 80 to 90% of our self-image around our sexual ability. Right? So, just off of that point alone, when you were talking about similarities and when you were talking about trends, if you really think about what it is, like I said, I just described about 80 to 85% of predicaments that a lot of black men find themselves in. right? They're either in a whole lot of debt because they're trying to impress other people who really don't care about them, right? They're consistently trying to find ways to exert power, whether that be healthy or 9 times out of 10 it's unhealthy, in the way of manipulating or taking advantage of or selling drugs or, you know what I'm saying, beating women, whatever it may have, beating black women, whatever it may have, right? Or subjugating black women to make other women feel more important, right? All of those things coalesce into the experience that a lot of black men have. We are simultaneously in a space where we want to do these things, but we cannot, and we know that we can't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And when you say do these things, you're talking about
access wealth, have that power, and to be able to engage with the fairer sex in a way that is healthy.
Wow, that's it's a lot there, right? Because you could talk about what is portrayed in society as far as like the imagery that's pushed on us, but a lot of it is also, it's circumstance. It's the circumstance that black people are in this country, and in a lot of sense globally too, right? Because wherever you go, it's always the darker skin that tends to kind of fall short on the totem pole, and so with that, where do we go from here? Because you've broken it down, right? You've broken it down. You've given the analysis, and I think you see some people who are active, and you include, right, in changing perception, in fighting or going against maybe the way we've been conditioned to think and how we've been conditioned to believe, whether it's deconstructing like patriarchy, whether it's how we self-identify, but how is something like this? How can something like this be really move forward on a larger scale?
So I'm glad you asked that question, and I know I'm gonna say that my phone will stop going live. I got a phone call. It's cool though. So I have this book in front of me, right? And the book's called Black Men, Obsolete, Single, and Dangerous, The African American Family in Transition. It's by Haki Madhubuti, right? And the way that I read my books is like, I have conversations with my books. There are notes in my margins, there's underlines, there's highlights and stuff like that, right? There's a quote in here that says, the bottom line is this: if we are to develop as a people, enlightened education requires that gender distinctions be minimized to those areas where such distinctions are vital and necessary. I'm going to say that again. The bottom line is this: if we are to develop as a people, enlightened education requires that gender distinctions be minimized to those areas where such distinctions are vital and necessary. Understand that I am not pushing for a gender-free society, but a society where one is not oppressed due to sex, race, religion, or etc. Right? The reason why I felt like that was so foundationally important is because the way that we perceive manhood is intimately tied to the way that we perceive femininity and the way that we perceive womanhood, right? The way that we as black men perceive femininity and the way that we perceive womanhood is epistemologically incorrect. Bottom line, the way that we perceive women and femininity.
Break that down.
So, in order to understand epistemology, you have to understand cosmology, right? Cosmology is just a fancy way of saying how it is that we perceive the universe came to be, right? When we think about cosmology, 9 times out of 10 people would think about religion, right? The largest religions right now are Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Within the scope of Christianity, the hierarchy is God, man, woman, right? God, man, woman. You are putting your partner, you are putting your equivalent beneath you, right? when you engage in that type of perception, everything else becomes unstable, right? Have you ever tried to build a house on a vertical foundation?
Nah.
It will fall because there's not enough surface area for the weight of the house to be distributed evenly, right? You literally have one thing, right? Which means that anything that the woman does has to literally go up through the man instead of her being able to operate in her own space and be more radial with her reach, right? So that's the first thing. For a lot of nations, their epistemology, which is their perception of right and wrong, derives from religion, right? So when we begin talking about, when we begin speaking about what is right and what is wrong, it comes from a space, or it comes from a place that originates in a quote-unquote divine order. You know what I'm saying? And if you go against that divine order, you got hell to pay, right? All of those things inclusive. We as black men have to rid ourselves of this perception that women are beneath us. We really have to rid ourselves of that perception. And we start by recognizing that femininity is not inherently weak. It just has a different set of strengths that are outside of our own. Right? What do I mean by that? The reason why most niggas don't know how to access their emotions is because they feel like if they do, they're going to be a bitch. Bottom line. So instead of actively engaging in your emotions and actively engaging in what it is, why it is that you are angry. You know that you're mad, but why? Why are you angry so often? What are you angry at? Right? Oh, no, G, I'm not trying to be no bitch at the 30. How is it that you're not trying to be no bitch, but you're afraid of crying? You're afraid of expressing emotion, but you're not trying to be no bitch. You're not trying to be perceived as feminine. You're not trying to be perceived as quote unquote a woman. Because you are going to in turn receive the wrath of what a lot of women receive, and you are not strong enough for that.
So what you're saying is that black men, our relationship with femininity needs to change.
Yes.
I don't stop talking about saying something.
No. I just want to highlight, based off what you said, it kind of brought a couple things, triggered a couple things in my memory, you know. So when I was in my undergrad, I studied, engineering. And one of my counterparts, he's black, he's Haitian actually. We took an exam, when the exam gets out, a lot of people, what she got, right? And then this one girl, she was white, she got a higher score than he did. He felt some kind of way. So he was like, oh, that ain't gonna happen, I can't let a woman beat me in my exam scores or whatever. So he worked harder and he made sure he was like on top of the class after that. So that's one aspect, intellectually. Men verbalize it and be like, that can happen. Two, in sports. Women out here, they're ball players too, soccer, basketball. But, if a woman beats you, like cross you up on the court, that's a no-go. And you can't...
They go from to like,
yeah, so you can't really... It's an issue. You can't really be... being outbeaten by a woman, even publicly or subconsciously, it is an issue, and a lot of men do feel some kind of way about it, if it's intellectually or...
The word that you're looking for is emasculated.
Sure.
Like, let's just lay it plain now. You feel as though somebody would kick you in the dick. Right? But why does that exist? Right?
Yeah.
It exists because, once again, we as men have divinely ordained that women are weaker than us. Right? So if you are beaten by a woman, it in turn makes you weaker than a woman. You wish. Is that healthy? Absolutely not. Why? Because then in turn, anything that operates around that premise, anything that operates around the premise of I am being woman-like in any way equates to weakness.
So let's put the flip side to this. How about women who want men to be better than them? for example, even on the court, let me say, you find a woman the same stature, whatever, and then she beats you on a one-on-one. She's like, "Oh, I'm a girl, let me beat you," or whatever, or being more dominant in different career fields or other way. And as a woman, she'd be like, I'm a woman, can't let me out hustle you or something like that. So in that perspective, what's women's relationship with femininity? That's also an issue. Or with masculinity.
I think that women would not have as much of an issue with masculinity if the masculinity that they were not exposed to is toxic. Right? So let's say, for example, get the example that you gave about, I'm a woman and I shouldn't be making more than you, this, that, and third, yada, yada, yada. Okay? Let's explore that. Why is it the narrative that men have to make more than women? Right? It goes back into the idea of wealth and power, right? The ability to provide and the ability to create a reality that's comfortable, right? We as men have charged ourselves with that reality, even though, demographically speaking, black men have an equivalent amount of obstacles within their access or from their access as black women do. But because the relationship that white men have with black women is different than the relationship that white men have with black men. Black women have a little bit more reach than black men, right? But we as black men internalize that as a challenge because we have not gotten ourselves to the point of executive function in the way of being able to access and utilize those resources properly. So if this woman comes and says, "You're supposed to be making more than me because I'm a woman," as a man, if I'm making less than her, I'm not gonna lie, I will feel some type of way, but not because she's making more than me. It's because you decided that was the barometer by which you are going to measure me as a man, and for me, that means that you are perpetuating toxic masculinity as well. You are literally saying that instead of coming to me and saying, how can we utilize these things as a team, or how can we utilize these resources as a team to make sure our family's straight, you come to me and you saying, essentially, you want some bullshit. No, that's a problem, right? That's a perpetuation of toxic masculinity. Now, how is that a perpetuation of toxic masculinity? Very easy. Something that's toxic not only diminishes the organism that it is in, but it diminishes the environment in which that organism can usually thrive, right? The idea that the only way that you provide to your family is through money is wildly narrow. Wildly narrow. Because that woman could be making more than me, right? But you come home, you upset, you don't know how to process your emotions because you have gotten into this space where because you feel as though you make more, now you have to be more quote unquote masculine. Or because the environment that you're going in to make more of this money is a more masculine space, and because you're a black woman, you cannot express yourself in fear of being that bitch ass black woman, you can't do any of these things. So now your emotions that are usually free flowing are stunted, and it comes back to me. And as a black man, because I don't know how to access my emotions, now you mad at me because I'm not understanding where you coming from. Do you see how quickly that becomes a snowball? Based upon that one premise of this is the only way that you can provide. You dig what I'm saying? So women's relationship with femininity, once again, is intricately tied to our relationship with masculinity. Because the way that we intrude on femininity a lot of the times is to reassert our own masculinity, right? So let's look at it like this. Why do people rape people?
Why do people rape people?
Why do people rape people?
I guess from research, sometimes it's a power thing.
Exactly. Rape is a crime of power. It is the ability to access something that is usually closed off to other people. I am this individual who is coming to take something from you without your permission. Right? I am expressing this power. that is one of the primary ways that men, also black men, invade on the femininity of black women, right? But the reason why a lot of black men do that is, once again, their perception of femininity and their relationship to femininity is one that is toxic, and it's one that requires the subjugation of that lifestyle in order to increase our own. And that is not something that is actually logically belonging to black men or black people. It's not. You dig what I'm saying? So that whole idea of women's relationship to femininity, or especially black women's relationship to femininity, we have to look at the environment in which their femininity develops as well. You know what I'm saying? Because more than 50% of black households are single households, and they're ran by women. Right? But a black man come in off some that shit and think that he's entitled to this entire domain simply because he's a man. And because a black woman wants to, some black women want to affirm his masculinity, they allow him to run around like a petulant child. That man does not deserve that kingdom because he is not a king.
Mm.
You get what I'm saying? It's a power thing.
And then I guess our discussion, so just organically, our discussion has evolved from, the black man's or a man's perception of masculinity, then we moved into a female's perception of masculinity. And now we're in the realm of masculinity, feminism, femininity within relationships, and how that structure needs to be balanced in order to create a better image in a family structure.
Yes.
So in this family structure that we're presently in, I guess the perpetual. So let me say, in an ideal world, how would this healthy, emotionally available, balanced black family operate? We have the perception, the man's the breadwinner, the woman, stays at home, the kids, they have their own place. But there's a concept of structure that we wrote with about how the families ran. But in terms of, if we can break apart all the components that we know and can build it for it to be more free flowing, exactly how would that look like? Maybe we'll have the same structure, but there might be more allowance for emotions or shifts in positions, or how would that help?
I think that's an important question because if you look at the world today, the reality that we're living in now, where for instance, like black women are most highly educated.
They're the most educated and they're the highest educated group in the United States of America, and they're also at the forefront of creating the most small businesses in the United States of America. Black women are the shit, bro. Like, okay, I'm listening.
So it is a good question because I think that a lot of people and a lot of us grow up with, we're conditioned to see how, let's say, adulthood and building a family should go, and it's modeled to us in a certain way in our childhood, and the way that society is not progressing, and for in a lot of good ways too as well, as far as increase in equity, increase in gender equity. Hopefully we see more increase in racial equity as well. That also kind of shifts like the guard a bit as well. So I think it's a good question around, okay, what does that, let's say, ideal family structure look like, or is it, no longer adhering to one particular structure, but going based on circumstance, but I think it's a good question.
So in reading this book, right, but also understanding from a clinical perspective what constitutes to a healthy learning environment, right? Free access to food, water, clothing, shelter, right? the ability to explore one's interests at leisure, the ability to see positive images of growth and development, right? And the ability to engage in such a way where your reality is consistently validated, right? So, Toby, you're saying that the conversation evolved from black men to black women to the black family, right? The way that the conversation evolved is a microcosm of how I think the most effective black, I guess you could say, networks or families can operate, right? So, the way that we're all sitting at this table right now, in a sense, we are all equals in our own regard, right? When we talk about structure, the structure is not a line, it's a circle. What are we accomplishing to get from this point back to this point while utilizing all of the resources that we gathered to make sure that when we get to this point, we can then move forward, right? We are entirely too dependent upon a perception of the male or the man being the quote-unquote head of the family. Now, there is a saying that says, if the man is the head, then the woman is the neck, right? I think a lot of people look at it to still see that the man is at the top and the woman is beneath. You miss it completely if you're not paying attention. The head literally cannot function without the neck. Because when you think about the neck, you're just thinking about the neck itself. You're not thinking of all of the structures that what the neck does, all of the things that are inherent in the structure of the neck. If you don't have an esophagus, you can't eat. If you don't have a trachea, you can't breathe. If you don't have this part of your spinal cord, your brain cannot function, right? The head literally cannot function without the neck. It can't, right? Or if it does, it functions at a significantly limited capacity. You dig what I'm saying? Yeah. So if you are looking at it from that perspective, you're not looking at where the head and the neck are placed as it relates to anatomical figure. You're looking at how those two things collaborate in order to create a reality of function. Right? So we're not looking at a hierarchy. We're looking at what are the things that we as a team can contribute to this entire family dynamic. You understand what I'm saying? What can we do at this point in time? And that's the thing. That's the reason why I say when we look at it from a place of hierarchy, that's archaic because it does not allow for adaptation. It does not allow for ease of movement. I'm gonna say it to you like this. For a lot of people, a man is supposed to be the protector of a household, right? So let's say you have a man and a woman, black couple. The man is software engineer, makes 6 figures, right? The wife is a lawyer, also makes 6 figures, so they make relatively the same amount of money. The man is progressive, the woman is more traditional, right? The woman, because of previous trauma, has gone to the gun range and become an expert marksman. The man, on the other hand, because of his stature and because of his gender, very rarely has been in physical altercations to a point that his best self-defense is basically knowing how to, you know what I'm saying, throw tree hands, right? If somebody runs up in the crib, who would you expect to protect the house first?
The man.
Why? Would that be a smart decision in that situation?
No, it wouldn't.
But you would expect the man to protect the house first.
Right.
That would probably get you and your family killed.
Right.
That archaic thinking, that sexist, that sex centralized thinking will get you and your family killed. Yeah. Simply because you want to have a pissing race with a nigga who came in your house with a pistol. That don't make no sense at all. If my wife is an expert marksman, we are in the house, somebody breaks into my crib, the first thing I'm going to try to do is get a pistol in her hand. Because I know good and goddamn well we going to live out this bitch. Because she going to take 2 of your eyes out and I'm not going to win. You feel what I'm saying?
Right.
It is working in conjunction with the strengths of each person. Right? Now, on the other side of that, shit, I'm a software engineer. I know that everything in our house is straight, whether it be our finances, whether it be security cameras. I know that everything in our house is because everything is straight. We don't have to worry about that, right? The reason being is because that's my place of expertise, right? if we are operating on knee-jerk decisions, if we are operating on impulses based upon schemas that we have built about this idea of who's supposed to be protecting whom, if you are not smart, that will get you killed.
So it sounds to me like, one that needs to be part of it is like unlearning or deconditioning, and so as far as, let's say we're looking at individuals, and we're hearing this conversation around therapy come up a lot now. So in your opinion, do you feel like therapy is a starting point for, let's say, unlearning or deconstructing traumas, or even like progressing when it comes to like your emotions, learning emotions and your emotions better, or do you believe like the other avenues to take first or alongside that?
Therapy is never the starting point. And I say that as a therapist. And I recognize that as a mental health practitioner and a mental wellness coach. Therapy is never the starting point. Therapy is usually the point that people get to when they are out of options. Or therapy is the point that people get to when they usually have gotten to a point where they don't necessarily think that this will work, but they're doing it for shits and giggles. Right? The starting point of that is the person coming to the realization that what it is that they are doing is causing themselves damage and the people around them damage, and that person has to have enough emotional intelligence to recognize that they can change it themselves, or to care enough to change, because some people are walking fucking wrecking balls, and they don't care, because they take pride in being a wrecking ball. The person has to recognize the value in therapy, otherwise therapy does not work.
Right.
Because I have literally had to tell some of my clients, I have had to ask them. Actually, it was funny. I asked them, why are you here? Because my girlfriend thinks I should be here. Do you think you should be here? I don't know. You've been in therapy for 15 years.
Wow.
You are not here of your own accord. And whenever you come in, you don't know what you want to talk about? Yeah, you might need to take a break from therapy, dog. Right? Because you need to understand why it is that you're here. It's almost like going to it's not necessarily the greatest example for me personally. It's almost like going to a pastor, right? It's almost like going to a clergy person that you trust to give you information. Or it's almost like going to your parents, right? Our parents over time have told us a myriad of things. And the older we get, the more those lessons sink in. But the younger we are, the more likely it is that we're just going to disregard what they're saying. Why? Because we're not ready to receive information. It challenges our worldview entirely too much for our minds to comprehend at that level of experience. So we reject it. You have to be ready and willing to be in an environment that may be the most frightening environment that you've ever been in your life. And not a lot of people have that courage.
That's deep. That's deep. So it sounds like, a lot of what you're talking about deals with self-awareness.
Yes.
Developing self-awareness, and then becoming educated on emotions. So even like when we talk about this idea of emotional intelligence, a lot of people, it might just sound like a phrase, but like it's it's a serious thing. Being like tapped into your emotions and really being able to understand your emotions. So we're starting to come to the tail end of this. So we're going for a little over an hour. And for those who are on Odie's Instagram,
hopefully it's still
we did it a little differently this time. We're testing out the YouTube, and so I haven't seen any of the questions come in through here. I'm not sure if they've not come in or what the case may be. But we're gonna work and improve each time on Pepper Soup Talk. But again, we want to thank Odie for being here. So do you have any questions to ask him?
I guess this one final question. So I guess there's another dynamic. I'm not sure how in depth we can get into just masculinity within. I guess masculinity being inserted within other men. So one thing that I was thinking about in this conversation Fat Joe, right? So he got into some argument with some guy a while ago. You know, we were just testing him, you know, pressing him. The guy had a gun, right? And you know, Fat Joe kept, you know, pushing the limits like, hey, you're not gonna use that, blah 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 blah. If you're, I don't know what else he said, but you know, pushing the envelope on that, and you know, trying to prove, you know, I guess he's, whatever. At the end of it, the guy shot him just because he pushed him to that point.
Well, you know.
And it's because, you know, he was saying, was reflecting on that situation, you know, the guy had to shoot him because he basically gave him no other choice, and, you know, he forced his hand.
Right.
And, you know, later on in life, he realized, you know, some things don't have to go that way. And just in terms of just, you know, being amongst other men, how to be, I guess, in a healthier relationship. Well, I know one is with ourselves, and then another is, you know, how you know, portray a healthy relationship with other men.
So your question sounds like, how do we deal with masculinity in the context of other masculinity? And essentially, how do we engage with ourselves, both internally and externally? Here's the thing. I think it was Frederick Douglass said it's better to build, what do you say? It's better to build up children than to try to repair broken men. Yeah. Right? You ever seen Juice?
Yeah.
Right. When Tupac got on the elevator and my man seen it, when not when they got on the elevator, when they were in the hallway, Tupac came up to him, he was like, I ain't shit. I know I ain't shit. But when I decide that you not shit either, I was like, yo, this man's a fucking sociopath. But that's a defining thing. I feel like I have dominion, right? The root word for the word dominion is domino, right? The root word domino in Latin translates roughly to God. I dominate you. I have that type of control over your life, right? When you are dealing with men like that, honestly, you move out of the way. Unless they pose a significant threat to yourself and your family. At that point, you blow them niggas out the back door, right? And I say that because I, as a man, am not going to allow you, a child in a man's body, to attempt to utilize deadly force to continue to, you know, postulate that you're a man. It just doesn't work that way. But I'm also not going to go out of my way to prove to you that I am a better man than you by coming to tell you what you should or should not do with your life. Once again, you have to be ready to receive that information. If you're not ready to receive that information, that means that you are willing to shoot me over me challenging your perception. At that point, you are not a man. You're not. You are willing to shoot me because I'm calling you out on bullshit. That's the same type of nigga who will beat a woman for asking him to do something that he perceives as woman's work. Right? So when we talk about engaging with each other and holding each other accountable, it starts with the people who you trust around you, right? Because if some random dude came up to you on the street and tried to tell you how to be a man, first of all, I'll be like, who the fuck is you? I don't know you, bruh. You don't know me. You don't know the experiences that I've been through, and neither do I know about yours. So how can you tell me that what it is that I'm doing is incorrect? We have to hold each other accountable in our own circles. Me, as a dude, my level of accountability is whenever my niggas around me, they know me. Don't use the word bitch. I can't stand that word. And I explained it to one of my homeboys why I could not stand the word. He was like, you know what, I get it. Can't stand the word. Do not refer to women as bitches or females around me. That irritates me because it's a reduction. Especially when you're talking about black women, bro. Don't do that. You dig what I'm saying? Those type of accountabilities or even challenging particular perceptions of what we're doing right now, having these conversations that are based in fact, or having conversations that are based in researched opinions or researched hypotheses. so that we're not just shooting the shit, but we're having a conversation that is constructive.
Mm.
It allows us to really explore what it means to be healthy and still masculine men.
Mm.
You dig what I'm saying? Because a lot of dudes, once again, they equate masculinity to destruction.
Mm.
And that's unfair to men. That's unfair for us to perceive ourselves that way.
Mm.
Because even though women incubate children, even though women take care of the children for 9 months internally, even though the women feed the children who are inside of them for that period of time, we still had a hand in that child's creation, right? We still utilize some of our cells to create this child. So we need to behave as such. We need to behave as if we also have the capabilities of not only creation but nurturing, right? Because if this woman is pregnant, let's going back to the warrior example. If this woman is pregnant, her mobility is limited, right? Her hormones are a little bit more fluid than usual, right? She needs a particular set of things that we can assist in providing to her, right? She needs a particular level of emotional security that we can assist in providing to her. Mm-hmm. She needs a particular level of mental engagement that we can assist in providing to her, right? Even just something as simple as rubbing her feet. Like that's quality time. That's that reassurance that I'm going to be here for you throughout this experience. Not just when she's with child though, just overall being able to recognize that I can create an environment where this person feels safe without necessarily engaging in physical activity that quote unquote projects safety. You understand what I'm saying? So understanding masculinity from a context of nurturing and creation instead of war and destruction.
That's a lot of insight for all our black men who's been watching this. I'd say.
I think just one last thing, just to round it up,
okay.
Because it's very impactful. We've learned a lot with you on this show. So as the line said, it's easier to raise children than to fix a broken man. If I misquoted, no, I apologize. So what thing or how would you, especially let's focus on young black men, like 10, 13, whatever. At that age, that's when you really get into fights and about to go wild a little bit. So how would you, or what would you tell them to convey like it's okay not to fight or not to internalize these aggressions and be in these fights, getting suspended or doing some questionable things at this age? What can you tell them to help them not go to this path and it's embedded in them later in life? Like, what's a good advice to give them right
now? And what's interesting, and I'm not sure how much or how little you can relate to, but in the beginning of this conversation, you spoke about growing up with a lot of anger. So someone who's kind of over time grown, has gone through his growth, through maturity, learned a lot. What has that looked like for you as far as coming into your own identity and maybe becoming more emotionally expressive or being able to have like a healthy relationship with emotions? Like, what does that look like for you? And something that we want to really do with this type of soup talk is just like encourage all of us to be willing to be vulnerable. So like,
I got you. So I'm going to answer the question in two parts. The first question is, what would I say? Depends on the person and what that person is experiencing, right? In mental health, there is no one size fits all. There's nothing like that. Now, if I were to say something, the first thing I would ask them is, how much is your life worth? How much do you think, or how much do you feel that you are worth? Right? The next question I would ask them is, can you imagine what it is like to not be alive? Second thing. And the third thing I would ask them is, what do you think happens to the pain that you feel when you die? Because it doesn't just go away, right? The most prolific image of black men outside of rapping, outside of playing ball, and outside of being a successful drug dealer is a dead body. Mm-hmm. That's number 4. Ball player, prolific drug dealer, rapper, dead body. Mm. Honestly, if we really want to get into it, right? How much is your life worth? When we look at this image of this dead black person, this dead black man, what we usually see around this person is a lot of grief, is a lot of tiredness, is a lot of weariness, right? This is something that we consistently have seen for the past 400 years. The pain that is experienced when you die does not go away. It amplifies the pain that we have been feeling for the past 400 years. And you decided to contribute to that pain because you felt that you had to prove that you were a man. Now you're dead. So now what? Right? To answer your question, I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. Right? So my mother told me straight up, she was like, William, because you are so angry all of the time, and because of your stature, somebody's going to kill you. Mm. Somebody's going to kill you. Or you are going to try to kill somebody. Mm. Because you don't know how to properly express your emotions. Right? And when I say I was angry, I was angry some days. Like, I used to throw chairs out of windows and shit. People used to talk about me, I should just hit them. Like, because I couldn't think that quick. It's like, man, fuck you, I'm just gonna rock this shit. I'm bigger than you, so that's what it is, right? When I was able to be more vulnerable and to be more open and to be more aware of my emotions, as a man, it can be very rewarding, but it can also be extremely difficult, right? It's a different type of difficulty to have an awareness and to have that level of internal responsibility to know that you fucked up and the way that you fucked up impacted somebody else's life for the rest of their life. That is very difficult to sit with. But it is something that you have to sit with in order to grow, because through most mistakes, there is some type of pain associated with it. And pain is a significant motivator for learning. You have to understand pain in order to understand relief and how to seek that relief. And a lot of people want to learn how to be relieved without feeling pain. Your body does not function that way, right? So you ask me how it is that I grew, how it is that I came to this emotional intelligence, because I had to climb. Because I had to go through extremely dark places. Because at times I had to light my own candle or light my own lantern. And I had to gather the resources in order for me to do that in a place that was both dark and damp. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I've been to particular heights where I literally could not breathe, and I had to figure out how to reserve my energy so that on the ride back down, I did not stumble and fall. So being able to recognize those factors and being able to recognize those things gives you the ability to say, I am here, I have learned, I am continuing to learn. And just to go back to the mountain analogy, as it relates to us as black men being humble, when you get to the top of the mountain, you don't see the edge of the earth, it just doesn't fall. You see a vast landscape. The amount of energy that it took you to get to the top of that mountain should allow you to understand that there are a majority of things that you still need to learn. Simply because you have gotten to the top of the mountain does not mean that you understand the entire world. Simply because it seems like you're on the top of the world does not mean that you have dominion over the world. It simply means that you have the vision to recognize that there are a multitude of ways to get to one place. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful. Powerful. Again, one, thank you for tuning in to Pepper Soup Talk. We air on Saturdays, bi-weekly, 4 p.m. This is actually the last Pepper Soup Talk of 2020.
Hey.
So we had the opportunity to sit down with Mr. Odilakachi Onwukwe.
Yes, sir.
True Igbo man.
boy. I'm gonna blow my next thing. Yeah.
We want to hear how we did. We want to get your feedback. Again, this is also a new setup too, so we want to hear from you. Please shoot us a DM. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you like what you're seeing. But Toby,
I think this was a dope talk. Hopefully, we get a part 2. You know.
Oh yeah. Always.
Yeah. Appreciate you coming on the show.
No problem.
we got any final thoughts? Final words?
Be safe.
Be
Happy
safe.
holidays.
We're still in the pandemic.
Oh yeah, we're still in the pandemic, bro. We're still in the panoramic. We're still in the Panamera. Y'all gotta be safe.
But we will see you in 2021.
Facts.